Mr. We've got quite the team assembled here.
You guys said you like me bringing principals, right, Tammy? So
There you
here we go.
We've got them. So we will be talking about, we have 2 hours slated for this, the principal selection process. And this, unless someone wants to correct me, this is mostly for information processes. For purposes, we can talk about the processes and what our thoughts are to date. But if everyone, Mr. Smith, if you would interview, boy. Can you interview everyone here?
I will have everyone introduce themselves, and we're very excited to bring back the principal selection process. We know that last year, before we implemented the process, we actually met with school board members in 2x2s to give you an overview of what that process would be. And then we promised that we would bring back an update in the fall around things that we've learned from the process, successes from the process, and to give you some data. We have a lot to discuss today. We have folks around the table who are going to talk about different aspects of the process, and I will start with Amelia, and she can introduce herself and tell us where she's from.
I'm Amelia Mitchell, the proud principal at Stone Middle School in the Westfield Pyramid. Come out and see us.
Hi, I'm Javon Rogers, principal at Gunston Elementary School in the Hayfield Pyramid.
Hello, I'm Fabio Zuluaga, the Region 2 Assistant Superintendent.
Good afternoon, I'm Sean McDonald. I'm the Director of the Office of Talent Acquisition and Management.
Good afternoon, my name is Mia Devers. I'm the proud principal of Dogwood Elementary School in the South Lakes Pyramid.
Good afternoon, Greg Hood, principal, Madison High School.
Afternoon, Anthony Harris, principal of Frost Middle School in the Woodson Pyramid.
Good afternoon, Lisa Barrow, Director, Professional Growth and Career Development.
Good afternoon, Becky Bainick, Assistant Soup, Region 5.
And so today we're going to bring you some background as to why a new process for principal selection. We're going to talk about different aspects of the process. We're going to share a bit of lessons learned from the process, things that we're very excited about in terms of additional professional development for candidates at every step of the process, and then really take a look forward and really think about how we can create a process that provides as much flexibility, as much PD for our candidates, and really providing us with that diverse candidate pool that we're looking for and those diverse hires in our buildings. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean. He's going to present today. And I told our immediate managers that my job is the interjector. So I may interject from time to time. And of course, we have all of our administrators around the table who can certainly answer questions after the fact if there are specific questions about how we implement and different rigorous parts of the process. So with that, go ahead, Sean.
All right, good afternoon. And just a little bit of background about the team that we've assembled here. We do have folks from our Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement with us here at the table and in the audience. And they've been wonderful collaborators and partners in really helping to develop out the professional development and the learning for our principal pool candidates. Also in our audience, we have Carolyn Hayden, who is our coordinator for administrative hiring. And she and her team did outstanding work in researching the processes that are used with other districts around the country and setting them benchmarking as we were developing our process. And so I want to acknowledge the hard work of that team and the continuous hard work that they put into this process every day. The principals that are here this afternoon represent individuals who have either served as interviewers as part of this process, individuals that have delivered the professional development as part of this process, or as in Anthony's case, someone that went through as a candidate as a part of the process. And so we have different perspectives represented here at the table this afternoon. All right, so the role of the principal has changed and has become more complex as time goes on. And it's expanded in a variety of different areas. Those areas include instructional leadership, management skills, and also looking at a variety of different complexity factors that impact, one of those being a changing student demographic. It's super critical that we find the right individuals to take on the role of the principalship. When we were conducting our research about the principal pipeline processes around the country, the team considered 4 key areas identified by the Wallace Foundation, which we believe would strengthen our district's principal pipeline. One of those included utilizing a selective hiring process, and hence that's why we moved into developing out a pool process. It was critical that we looked at stakeholder feedback from around the district before we moved forward with a process. And in speaking with stakeholders, a number of concerns were raised about where we were and where we potentially could be. Ultimately, there were concerns about inconsistencies that may have existed across the regions as the process was carrying itself out, an impression that some competitions may have been predetermined. Sorry about that. Push that button a little too hard. Impression that some competitions were predetermined. The concern by candidates was that our process may have not been clearly defined or confusing or cumbersome, or in some cases lacked transparency. Given all of that information and that feedback, it was important for us to set out to develop a process that would address those concerns. The goal of our new process was to diversify our hires, improve access to all principal vacancies, ensure that we have a clear and transparent process for all involved, ensure that we have well-defined feedback loops for our candidates, ensure that we made professional development a key part of the process so individuals could continue to grow and learn as they were waiting for their opportunity to take on a principalship. And we wanted to ensure that our process was aligned with the FCPS strategic plan. On this slide, you'll find a summary containing a few data points collected from school districts during our research phase. This information was provided at a work session last year, but we've developed this chart just to summarize and bring some of the key points to the board's attention. In our process, candidates pass through 3 steps in order to be invited into our FCPS principal pool. Candidates remain in our pool for a period of 2 years. While in the pool, the candidates have an opportunity to receive professional development. When we reach that 2-year mark, a conversation will be held with individuals to determine what the next step will be for them, looking at continued and further professional development, so we can determine whether or not they'll remain in the pool at that time. This chart summarizes the previous FCPS selection process prior to the 17-18 school year, so prior to the spring of last year. Essentially, our old process is phase 2 and phase 3 of our current process. We added just one additional phase to the process when we implemented our new process. So phase 1 is our pool component. Candidates apply and move through a series of 3 screenings. The first is a paper screening, so an application screening. Individuals apply to the district. They also provide responses to 2 written questions. So the candidates are reviewed, or their writing skills are reviewed at that point in time. Individuals that are successful at that particular stage are then invited to participate in Skype interviews. Those Skype interviews happen with two individuals that are on staff. Individuals that are successful at that stage then move to the in-person interview day. And then on that day, individuals are put through a series of 3 tasks that are related to skills or knowledge related to the principalship. Prior to moving into phase 2, candidates have the opportunity to participate in professional development. This is new to our process. So individuals have gone through those first 3 stages to be entered into the pool. They receive feedback about their experience, and we're collecting data, and that really feeds into some of the development that these individuals receive as they're waiting for competition to move into specific school vacancies. At phase 2, stakeholder input is collected from the school community and school board members, and a leadership profile is developed. Specific school vacancies are advertised to pool candidates and to our sitting FCPS principals. Candidates at this point can express interest in a specific school vacancy once one occurs. At phase 3, we move into the school-specific selection. During this phase, community advisory panel will sit and interview candidates that are brought forward by the region. Region offices may also conduct interviews with the slate of candidates prior to bringing the candidates, the finalists, to the superintendent and his panel. So a distinct strength of this process is that it's highly collaborative. The pool process broadened the stakeholder groups who are available or able to contribute. We've added sitting principals as interviewers and central office department leaders as well as interviewers in this pool process. All interviewers are trained prior to serving as an interviewer. During the training session, process expectations are discussed, and interviewers have an opportunity to review and discuss the scoring tool. Additionally, during that training phase, interviewers have the opportunity to practice using the scoring tool in hopes that we are increasing inter-rater reliability when we're going through the process. We want to ensure consistency with the rating. Overall, a candidate's application or they themselves through the interview process will interact with 10 different interviewers. So 10 different individuals will have an opportunity to review an individual's candidacy over the 3 steps in the pool process. During the application phase, there are two individuals that review the application and the writing samples. At the Skype interview stage, again, 2 individuals conducting the interviews. And then during the on-site screening activities, candidates meet with a total of 6 interviewers. There are 2 individuals on each team for each of the 3 activities. To reduce potential bias, we do not place candidates before region assistant superintendents or executive principals in the region in which they're currently employed. An added benefit to this is we also increase a candidate's exposure across all regions within the division to ensure that we are maximizing their exposure and opportunities to be considered for vacancies. Our team continues to invest time, energy, and resources to ensure that the need for high-quality leaders here in Fairfax County Public Schools is advertised widely and that all interested candidates, internal and external, have a clear understanding of the process, and this will continue. The team has worked to ensure that interested parties have access to understand the process through the Principal Pool webpage, which was developed as part of this process, and by holding and hosting information sessions for candidates. We will continue to collaborate with principal associations and the region offices to ensure that this process is meeting the needs of the division. With external candidates making up approximately 25% of the applicant pool during our first year, the team will continue to expand our advertising initiative both through print and social media. Our goal is to continue to foster external applicant interest and to focus on improving the diversity of our candidate pool. In addition to our regular advertising sources, targeted ads have appeared in Ed Week, the Virginia Association, and the National Association for Elementary and Secondary School Principals, Diversity in Ed, LinkedIn, the National Association of Black School Educators, the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents, and we will continue to widen that outreach and that net. As one might expect, based upon our team's reflections and input from stakeholder groups, the process has evolved. It wasn't perfect on the outset, and we're going to continue to make adjustments as we continue through this process. Our team is committed to continuing to examine data and input to adjust the process as needed. We've made 3 adjustments since we initiated this process. One was for internal candidates, we've removed the requirement for a reference up front. We've aligned that with the placement of the reference with external candidates so that we have a congruent or consistent process, thank you, between both the internal and external groups. We've added principal voice to the process, and this is critical. Principals have an opportunity when serving as an interviewer to, 1, understand the process, 2, to learn about ways that they're able to support the growth and development of those individuals that they are supervising, coaching, and mentoring, and provide those development opportunities for those individuals. Additionally, this fall, we've accelerated the timeline by 2 months. So we're going to move up the closing of the process to ensure that we're bringing candidates into the pool earlier. So we'll have that wrapped up by the end of October, as opposed to the beginning of December, which is where we were last year. And we're going to continue to collaborate with stakeholder groups, specifically our region offices, which is the main consumer of our process. So how is the principal pool impacting selection? During the first year, we've noted the following impacts. 1, we've increased the rigor of the application process. 2, we're providing quality professional development to candidates prior to their appointments as principals, helping them feel ready to take on the challenges and more settled to take on the challenges of that role. And 3, we've improved hiring rates for both candidates of color and for our female candidates. During the first year, 45 individuals were admitted to our FCPS principal pool. Of the 45 individuals, 38 were internal FCPS candidates and 7 were external candidates. Strong interest was expressed across all 5 regions in the central office, and all 5 regions and central office are represented in our pool. When launching the process, it was clear that it was going to take a 2-year period to build the pool to the size and depth that we're hoping for. We're on track with this work, and we should be meeting our goals as we conclude the next cycle. These pie charts provide some information about the demographics of our principal pool. This is our hires as of August 31st, and these numbers have changed a little bit since then because we've brought a few more folks on board. Of the 15 newly hired principals, 80% of those individuals are female, and 27% of those individuals are people of color. The chart on this slide compares the rate of hire by subgroup between our previous process, spanning the years of 2009 to 2017, with the rate of hire by subgroup during our first year of the pool process. The percentages represent the number of individuals hired from that particular subgroup as compared to the total number of individuals hired. In the first year of this pool process, the rate of hire for women has increased. The data also shows slight gains in the rate of hire for candidates of color. As I mentioned earlier, all 5 regions have didn't mention this earlier, all 5 regions have successfully hired principals from this pool process. We have heard feedback from community members about the process, specifically concerns around the number of candidates that are being presented at the table during the community advisory portion of the process. Prior to presenting a slate of candidates to the community panel, the region office has an opportunity to review candidate data and profiles developed during the pool process, which gives them some very specific insight into the skill sets that the candidates are bringing to the table. And they compare that with the leadership profile that's been developed through the community and school board input. Reducing the overall number of candidates, while it may be of some concern to some community members, also has its benefits. Through this change in the process, we were able to provide an opportunity for community members to dig deeper with candidates. After the initial slate of questions or predetermined questions are asked, the candidate steps out of the room, and the community then, as a group, discusses and develops 3 follow-up questions so that they can explore further some concepts that they may not have heard enough about to really determine whether or not that individual would be a fit and match for their community's needs.
And I'm just going to interject here, looking at this from that previous process when I was a director in the old Cluster 1 and would sit in on all of the interviews. We were the screening part of it, by the way. It was, I would work with human resources to screen candidates, and we'd bring a slate of candidates in for the panel. And at that time, we would bring in a number of candidates, and as I would sit in on all of the panel discussions, we would often have the members of the panel, our community panel, wonder, why did we just see perhaps 1 or 2 really strong candidates, and that there were so many other candidates that were perhaps wasting our time, and that was the word of individuals around the panel. And so I think that with this process, we have, when we think about the quality of candidate, we're bringing a much higher quality candidate because of the rigorous process. And as Sean shares, now that we've made some changes to the process, offering them opportunities for follow-up, which is something that we didn't do before and something you can't do when you have a really long day of interviewing with a large panel to interview.
So one of the most critical components of this process is the opportunity for candidates to receive targeted professional development. So this past year, all but 2 of the pool candidates participated in the professional development opportunities. Several of our external folks found ways to creatively participate using technology. And so they would participate via Google Hangout or Skype to ensure that they had an opportunity to learn just as the other folks in their cohort. Our colleagues in the Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement have been outstanding partners in preparing and delivering this professional development. 2 outstanding FCPS principals, Javon Rogers and Amelia Mitchell, led the first cohort group through the professional development journey, and we thank them for doing that. The professional development is based upon the professional standards for educational leaders, which is grounded in current research and real-life educational leader experience. And several of the topics that were covered during the professional development or will be covered going forward are outlined here on the slide. Another important component of this process is ensuring that candidates receive feedback. Ultimately, if you think into your own personal life and times that you had an opportunity to be interviewed for a position and you walk away not knowing, what the thoughts of the panel were about your performance and not having that feedback to make improvement over time to hopefully get the position, this process addresses that specifically. And so candidates do have an opportunity to receive feedback at each stage of the process, so that they do know where they may have an opportunity to grow and what their strengths were, so that they can continue to sell those strengths. And based upon that feedback, individuals then can go out and receive professional development or seek out opportunities to grow in those areas. We do ask that the candidates sit out one pool cycle if they are not invited into the pool, so that they have sufficient time to have that professional growth experience and can come back stronger and ready to compete during that next, during the cycle. So going into year 2, it's important that we stay the course. There are opportunities for improvement, but success is most dependent on continuing to embrace this pool process. When conducting our research about the experiences of other districts who have implemented a similar process, one caution that they provided was not to make too drastic a change all at once. One district in particular experienced that particular situation where they received a significant amount of feedback from stakeholders, and they made some pretty significant or drastic changes to their process. The unintended consequence occurred that in that case, they watered the process down. The feedback was, this is too hard, this is too rigorous. So they watered their process down. It brought more candidates into the pool. However, in the end, those candidates weren't meeting the expectations of the community when it was time to bring them to the community panel. And so it's important that we maintain the rigor of our pool process. Several potential areas for growth and improvement are outlined on this slide. I would like to highlight the fact that we currently run 2 interview windows for our pool, but we do have an option that exists for external candidates who are late to the application, or late to the game, I guess. If there is a particular individual who is outside of the organization who relocates to our area and express interest, a region office can bring that individual forward, and we will run an expedited process to ensure that that individual is given consideration during that cycle. They'll still have to go through the 3 stages of the pool process like everyone else. It will just be in a much more condensed timeline. So, read a number of a lot of research around principal selection and the importance and the impact of principal selection. In particular, there was a white paper that was published by Gallup titled "The School Leadership Pipeline: Student Success and Leadership Succession." And the author states that serious leadership succession requires that principals and district administrators become talent scouts. Existing leaders must work from the expectation that they will look for and encourage teachers to consider leadership programs and urge promising assistant principals to join development programs. It's important that we work as leaders within the organization to hold those coaching and career development conversations with promising candidates. Sometimes that little pep talk will make the difference and motivate an individual to take the next step in their leadership journey. We want to ensure that all strong potential candidates are applying to and being considered for the pool. And that is one of the adjustments, I guess, that we made during this current application cycle. We reached out to each of the region offices to let them know who from their region had applied for consideration, who was on the 1 cycle on the bench, and region assistant superintendents and executive principals were able to reach out to individuals that they felt were strong potential principal candidates and invited them to apply to this pool. And we want to continue that particular effort. We have other opportunities for potential improvement outlined on this slide. But it's important that That same Gallup publication states, succession of assistant principals and principals actually begins with selecting teachers. Teacher talent is critical because it defines the quality of the pool from which school districts select candidates for aspiring leader programs, assistant principals, and principals. Many talented teachers require encouragement to step forward into a leadership initiative. And so it's really important that we as a district play an active role in developing teacher leaders who in turn become our assistant principals, who in turn feed our principal pipeline. So that leadership pipeline begins early on with the selection of teachers and then developing them to become our future leaders within the organization.
And if I can just interject, so we've just hired Dr. Helen Nixon as our next assistant superintendent. And in several of the interviews, she talked about talent spotting and how talent spotting is very important to this process. So we're looking forward to the ideas that she's going to bring to the table around enhancing our ability to spot talent within our schools. Because as you think about it, we're all talent spotters. We've all had interactions with those individuals who would make great administrators. And how do we get those individuals in front of a panel? It's talking to the right people. It's getting to our EPs and our assistant superintendents to give those individuals that tap to say, hey, you should get into this process because it's good and you're going to get a lot of professional development. So we're looking forward to Dr. Nixon as I look over Mr. Moon's head at her, and we're looking forward to what she's going to bring to the table around talent spotting.
So in that same vein, as we look forward, another critical strategy to ensure our sustainable leadership pipeline is to develop a pool process for the selection of assistant principals. Moving to a pool process will provide similar benefits as the principal pool process. Our goal is to develop out a process with a projected implementation of fall 2020. So shifting to a more rigorous process has helped to shed some light on our leadership pipeline. As a school division, we need to continue to reflect on strategies to support the growth and development of our future leaders. During tough budget cycles, highly impactful programs such as Lead Fairfax were eliminated. Our partners in the Office of Professional Learning and Family Engagement are working hard to rebuild those programs rebuild programs that support the development of school leaders. However, this rebuilding effort will take time and it will take the needed resources.
And might I add that when we talk about those programs being eliminated, it's been part of budget processes, and much of that was based on prioritization as a system. And so when the superintendent would bring recommendations to the board, and those were areas where previous superintendents felt that we could remove some of these programs and still move forward. I think we're at a point now where we see the importance of having that strong development program. I'm sitting here today because I was in the first class of the leadership program in Fairfax County. There were only 3 of us at the time. Fabio says, what was that, 1970? Yeah, that was 1970. But as a true testament to the importance and the power of cohorts, the power of professional development, I think that we get to where we need to go when we can reinvest in our leadership development across the system, reinvest in ensuring that we have strong teachers in place to take up the mantle of leadership as assistant principals, and then investing in those assistant principals so that they will be able to take on that new challenge that we have in the principalship. But the last key piece is that there was a time where once you got the principalship, it was kind of done. But we want to make sure that we're providing that key professional development for principals too, so that they can keep up with the changes that we see on a daily basis as it relates to education and all of the opportunities that students are bringing to us at the table. So it's important for us to think about this process, but to also think about how we can change our leadership development while at the same time providing PD across the board and across the system.
And so with that, this is the final slide in our presentation. So I thank you for your support and would like to open the floor up for questions.
Thank you so much. I have several board members. We first have Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Mr. Moon, and then Ms. Schultz. So Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. I appreciate that you first opened the presentation citing the Wallace Foundation. We talk a lot about best practice, and so that was music to my ears to see that we're looking at where we're citing best practice and guiding our work. So that's a glow under Dr. Braybrand's guidance and tutelage. I'm just going to be going through the slides because it's the only way I know how to make this coherent and not get in trouble with my colleagues for going in lots of different directions. The next slide, which was slide 4, just a quick note to think about where it said that the pool eligibility in years, and I noticed that most of the districts, it was about 2 to 3 years, and so not to be answered today, but to put it on your radar and our new Dr. Nixon, I would just like as a next step that we get a little more in a Braybrand briefing, why the 2 years? Because we are a complex organization and, you know, there's a lot of great teacher leaders and assistant principals, and 2 years just might not be enough that an opening in a school where you're a good fit is going to happen. And I don't want to be recreating work for this team to jetson people out after 2 years when there's really perfectly good candidates in there. So that was my feedback on that. On screen 6, you don't need to go to that. You can just go straight to 7. But 6, I just want to say I appreciate the added phase 1 that you put in on trying to strengthen how we're identifying talent. So I thought that was a good addition. But on slide 7, where we talked about a team of 55 interviewers, we're always talking about people's workloads in the division. And so that's a lot of people. And so one question I have, again, not to get answered now, because I really won't be able to ask my questions, is just how we're selecting the principals to serve in that role. And the reason I bring that up is because we have amazing teacher leaders in the building that principals, you know, get so excited about their incredible talent, right? And then in a system of 196 principals, we have like these rock stars that just have that combination of skill set and temperament and personality, and you name it, you guys know each other, you know who you just kind of go, wow. Getting those people in there and helping us build more rock stars in our pool. Just for Braybrand, it would be helpful to know how we identified which principals to bring in for that. Was it people that the division looked at and said, this is kind of like our dream principals, and we really think they've got the whole package to help us identify more. And then skipping forward to slide 12, I think this is the one I really wanted to draw my attention to my colleagues as much as, you know, talking to the wonderful presentation again that was here. I personally experienced where we were trying to do some searches this year, and I'm so appreciative that this is a division that's looking for the best fit, that we have 196 schools, and every school has its own culture and personality, and you want to get that great leader. And yet, if you look at these numbers, 45 individuals for 15 vacancies, it's a 1 in 3 that we hope. And that's the average. That doesn't even say of those 15 vacancies, because we have elementary, middle, and high, did we even have 3? I mean, maybe we had 5 for this vacancy and only 2 or 1 for another vacancy. And so while Sean, you did a fantastic job of kind of tempering those of us who, you know, kind of right away go, oh my gosh, what are we doing here? Yes, I agree that it takes time to phase in a new process. But I guess what I would have hoped for is that until we got our pool to be as robust and depth that we needed, that we would have kind of done almost a parallel of still keeping a little bit of our traditional process going until we're really up to speed, because I think there's going to be a big communication component that I'm going to touch on as well, that until people learn that this is the new way, that the 10th largest school system in the country does this, this is a pretty small number to be drawing upon. I mean, if we were a single high school district, these numbers I wouldn't be worried about, but we're massive, and so I think this is really tiny. And Dr. Brabrand, as one school board member, my advice would be, until we get that pool where Dr. Nixon and your subject matter experts say that we've got the depth to really be sure that we've got an ability to hire the best principals possible, and we get to identify and build our assistant principals toward it, then the old-fashioned way of still advertising the vacancy and taking resumes, especially external. I mean, we only had 7 external candidates for the 10th largest school system in the U.S. So I think that's a real cautionary tale, probably the thing I'm most concerned about as a board member. Slide 13 is the next step. I would really appreciate that data in context is so important. So can we please have the percentages or the of the applicant pool? This is just what our hires, so who we selected for the positions, but we need to know, what did the pool look like in terms of the demographics? Gender, race, I think those are both really important for understanding the demographics. So please make sure that we can get that in part of the Brabrand briefing. And I'm just quickly going to make sure if there was anything else on here. Just finally, on slide 22, where we talked about the future pipeline development, Marty, I appreciate you sharing your personal experience and the value that was in coming through one of these development programs. And I wouldn't discount the value at all. But I would ask that, again, through feedback and a Brabrand briefing, how is it that we know, even at a national level, that there are administrative credential programs? My 2 brothers-in-law who are in education went through that in order to become administrators, school building administrators. My own father went through it. I mean, we have so much on our plate. We have limited budgetary resources, and that was part of the reason some of these things got eliminated. Was we went through the Great Recession and we just said, look, where can we invest precious resources? So before we upstart these again, where we're still pressed for resources, I would like a little bit more reflection and thinking about, why are we supporting and encouraging graduate level programs, whether it's a doctoral degree, a master's degree, administrative credential degrees, and isn't that then the role that higher education helps us to provide that funding, but it's not drawing away the resources we need for smaller class sizes and addressing teacher workload in the system. So that, in a nutshell, was all I took from the presentation. I appreciate the fact that you all listened so intently. And I again, it's not that I don't welcome, if there's anything you want to speak to what I just said, but I knew we were limited in time, and I wanted to get the questions out for further reflection.
Any comments from the panel to Ms. McLaughlin's comments? Okay.
No, great advice.
Yeah, and we'll provide information in the next steps for you.
Mr. Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Fairfax. I have a few questions, some of which have been forwarded to Dr. Brabrand over the weekend, and hopefully you saw them. Let's start with something very simple, which can become very complex. Slide number 13, which gives us principal hire characteristics, demographic information. When I look at the one on the right, 13, one on the right-hand side, that's for 15 hires, correct? So when you say 7% Asians, which actually means just 1, am I not correct?
Yes, that is.
That's a one hire.
So that's compared to the total number of individuals hired, correct?
Sure, just 1 hire, that makes it 7%. So it's not really, had there not been that 1 hire, it would have been 0%.
Correct.
All right, I just wanted my colleagues to see that. Just a 1% making as if it's making a huge difference. Yes, it is making a huge difference, but that's only 1. I'm glad to have that 1. It's a better than nothing from my perspective. So, but having said that, I know that Mrs. McLachlan asked for the demographic information. I would like that demographic information to be at every stage, starting with the very first applicant, and then when you look at that, even within the phase one, you go through 3 steps. I want to see at each step, I want to see how our applicants are progressing in terms of their demographic information. That's a demographic information. And secondly, I want to ask you about in overall this whole process-wise level of involvement by teachers and parents. I don't think until, as far as parents are concerned, until we get to school-specific phase, which is phase number 3, there is no parental involvement throughout the process. I bring that up because in olden days, just a couple of years ago, before we began having this new process, that the reason that we have parent participation on the interview panel, because we value our parental input in selecting building principal, building leaders. But this whole process, with this new process, that the most important part seems to be coming at the phase number 1. That's where you have the pool. If you're not within the pool, your chance of getting in, unless you are sitting principal, another great sitting principal, the chance of someone outside their pool being picked as a principal is going to be very slim. So phase 1 is going to be very important, but in that phase, there's no parental input. Am I wrong in saying that?
No, so you're absolutely correct. So we do involve community members and i.e. parents, students, and teachers at the community advisory panel level, and that's in phase 2. Ultimately, at that phase, we're assessing fit and match for school buildings. And so they're going to bring that knowledge of the community and their experiences to the table during that phase. The pool process, the initial phase, is really set to assess a candidate's knowledge and skill related to competencies that are measured as a principal on a more technical level. And so not saying, I think this is something we can take back and have further conversations about as a group in terms of involving.
That's exactly what I'm looking for.
Sure.
I'm not looking for your definitive response today, but that's a definitive response. You will take that back and give it more consideration because, again, unless you are in the pool, your chance of becoming a principal is going to be nothing, close to 0.
Right.
At least for those within the school system. So you have to be in there, and in that phase, there's no parental input. I think it is, in my view, it is more than just knowing, having a technical knowledge of a person to be in that pool. But as a leader, building leader, you are dealing with not just the professional teachers, but much of the time you spend with the parent community, and even the outside the community as well. So there is a certain skill sets parents could contribute in providing feedback as you decide upon who's going to be in the pool.
Yeah, something we'll take back.
All right, thank you. And next couple of questions have to do with maybe, all due to my lack of knowledge, my ignorance, let me put it that way. So we had 45 in the pool. Were all 45 selected at the same time, or they were selected in 2 different times? Or is it like progressively became 45?
So they were selected over 2 windows. So we ran
Fall and spring, I saw that. Yes, so two times. It became 45.
Correct.
So initially it was less than 45, and then became 45. Yes. And then as we hired 15, not all 15 came from those pools because we had the sitting principals also becoming lateral transfer, correct?
So the 15 hires were actual hires from the pool. There's
Hires
another
from the pool.
Yes, there was another column on that slide that indicated our what we call transfers or promotions. So the promotions are individuals that may have gone from elementary to middle or middle to high. So 15 individuals were actually hired out of the pool.
Okay, so 15 hires, so 45 has become 30. 30.
Yes.
So as we lose people from the pool, as they are promoted, to replenish that?
Yes, so we just closed the application cycle for the fall window, and so we're in about a week and a half going to be running the Skype interviews followed by the on-site to replenish this fall.
To make it another 45, or is there a limit, or what are you looking for?
There is not a limit, so we're not capping the number of individuals that can be in the pool. We're looking to replenish and really get to a number that's healthy and sustainable in terms of filling our vacancies. So we're going to constantly be refreshing the pool, replenishing the pool, running a fall and a spring window. The spring window will be wrapped up in time that those individuals should be eligible to be considered for most of the principal vacancies for the 1920 school year.
And we would hope that those individuals that sat out around would have had the requisite professional development so that they would be eligible then for the spring pool.
Okay, as an enlarged board member, I probably, along with Mr. McElvey and Ms. Karen Camara, get to see more applicants applying for open positions than district board members. And, I have certainly felt the need to share with you. I think I have already done that with regional assistant superintendents and superintendents as well, that a number of people who have actually applied, has dwindled, because obviously it's limited by the poor, and on some positions I get to see same people over and over and over again, right? They may be due to whether it's a self-limiting factors amongst those in the poor, or that's all we have for those positions. We have elementary, middle, and high, and for example, for the middle school, if you have a certain number within the pool and only they can apply, and they're gonna apply over and over and over again, they're not get selected, right? So before we began using this new process, as a school board member, I got to see people whom I have never met before in the poor, but I had a chance to learn about them by talking with the regional assistant superintendents, and even get to ask questions. How ready is this person to become a principal somewhere in FCPS? What are the skills you think this particular person might need before he or she can become a principal? I get to have that opportunity. Suddenly I lost all that opportunity because, those people are not gonna be in the pool. So I don't know them. I don't get to know them. That's an important opportunity I've been missing. And also as an enlarged member, 196 different schools. I don't get to go to all 196. Stone Middle School could invite me so that I can go, because you're proud principal of Stone Middle School, and Gunston as well, and Dogwood, Madison. I know Frost Middle School. Come on, guys. All right. So I go to these school events, visit schools, and I get to meet with APs, and I get to know them. And then, who knows, some of the principals I might find, maybe many of those, all of those, fascinated by their abilities. And I will pray hard. I go to church every Sunday and pray hard for them, all of them, to become future leaders. With the new process, I don't get that opportunity. This is something I want you to think about. And also all those maybe APs not yet qualified to become part of the pool might need some practicing opportunities to go through entire application process, because you may have a real great potential, but until you actually go to the panel and face 8, 9 different individuals sitting there, including highly probing parents and students, that you wouldn't know what, you don't know what to expect. So gotta give those people an opportunity. So that's, from my perspective, someone who has done this for 20 years, that I thought that there was a huge departure from prior practice, something I valued very much, is just sorely missing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Min. Ms. Schultz, followed by Mr. McElveen.
So I agree. At the beginning of the presentation, it was the previous process was described as cumbersome or lacking clarity, and I agree with that. If we could, can we go to slides? I think slide 12 is very popular to talk about. So my question is, and this has come up in interviews of which I have been aware, what is the mechanism by which sort of a confirmation bias having to do with familiarity is going to be addressed? Because having a pool of candidates that is certainly predominantly at this time internal candidates lends itself to what I believe is a potential pitfall of a familiarity bias. That bringing in, somebody from a different state or different jurisdiction, or clear across the country, lends itself to, in a process, well, we don't really know this person, so what is the mitigation plan to prevent a familiarity bias being built into the process as you have?
I think that's certainly something we wanted to address by building this new process. What we found in our previous process is that the same individuals were coming to the table time and again for every single vacancy announcement. And so, I would, I don't want to overgeneralize, but one observation that I would make, or one thought that I have in terms of why that was happening, is because folks were familiar with those candidates. They knew them, and so they wanted to present that slate to the panel. Through this process, we're trying to maximize exposure so that multiple regions have an opportunity to get to know candidates beyond their current region. And that same idea holds true for external folks. They have an opportunity to maximize their exposure, whereas before, no one knew the external candidates. Now they're coming and meeting face to face with members of the region offices, and they're getting an opportunity to tell their story and share information about them, so that they are given more fair consideration, I guess, in the process.
Dr. Ivey?
And I just want to add that when the region offices collect the input from all the various stakeholders and build the qualities that that particular school community is looking for, we very much so comb all of the resumes to find the match.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because the math of 45 people in the pool minus 15 being hired and virtually all of them internal candidates, I don't think what you've described to me mitigates familiarity bias. The fact that there are some people in from outside and you get to pass them around or elevate them more doesn't mitigate the familiarity bias. So that's one concern that I have on a going forward basis that I think needs to be addressed. Two is an insubstantial pool to meet the demand. We have 196 schools, never mind the interagency and everything else. And when candidates are brought forward whose, let's just say, for example, entire school population can fit on one school bus, and you're talking about a school that has thousands and thousands and thousands of students, you have an insubstantial pool to meet the diversity of the demand, the diversity of the type of educational environments in which we have. And so my next question is, why is there only a pool for the principal process? Some of my schools have an associate principal. They have a number 2. Some of my schools have 6, 7, 8, 9 assistant principals. Those are, they are in charge of more students and run more on a daily basis than an elementary school that has 300 kids. So the complexity of our educational environments, to me, begs a much more robust process and much more beyond the single fulcrum of the principal position. That's not enough to do what we need, in my opinion. That doesn't necessarily, that's a comment, not a question. Can you go to slide 20 for me, please? I'm jumping around. I've got a couple of different questions. You said at one point, Mr. McDonald, the talk about what's making a promising candidate. My question is, what is the definition of a promising candidate? As you're looking for getting and recommending people and pushing people to get into the pool, I think that's the crux. What's a promising, is it familiarity? Is it people like this person, they get along? Who's defining the skill set, the inherent possession of skills to move and transition from being in the classroom or being in an assistant position to they have acquired and can now apply those skills?
Just a couple of things, Mrs. Schultz. First of all, thank you for bringing the issue of the familiarity and how really to level the playing field for wonderful potential applicants that may exist out there. I came to Fairfax 10 years ago from Lexington, Kentucky, and it took a while to really...
That's a Lexington, Kentucky accent?
That's what they said. And I said, yes, this is great. I'm becoming more and more Americanized here. So I am now, as you really come up with these wonderful questions, I'm thinking that perhaps, and this is not the arena to provide solutions, but perhaps we, with these candidates that come from other states or places, maybe we need to open our schools and bring them to, educational tours and say, hey, with the executive principals or with the regional assistant superintendent, come here and get to know 3, 4, 5 schools from our community. Once they apply, maybe we could consider offering those tours, but the reason why that's just an idea of perhaps many ideas that we could consider in the future. In terms of the other question is, what is exactly the set and what's the criteria that we use to maybe tap somebody and say, hey.
In our vernacular, what is the rubric against,
we do have one.
Against which they're being measured of possessing those skills?
We have one. I'm very familiar with it, and the principals are very familiar. The assistant principals are becoming more and more familiar. It's called the School-Based Administrator Rubric. And it really gives you exactly the skills and dispositions that you have to follow in the areas of instruction, the areas of culture, management, finances, communication. There are seven standards that we are, so those are the things that we use to an extent, not just to develop our principals and also our assistant principals, but also to see potential talent.
And who is grading a applicant or a potential applicant against that rubric? Who specifically is grading that applicant's skills against the rubric?
The person that really evaluate or assess all of our wonderful assistant principals in the school division, the principals are the ones who assess all of our assistant principals. We may provide additional support during the assessment process, but the principals are the ones who assess our assistant principals in the different domains that I just shared with you.
So I would respectfully request that I think an evaluation of how that person has been evaluated against the rubric not be relied upon as their previous administrator, that it has to be a part of the pool process, of their entry into the pool process, that you all need to check the work to determine that that person possesses that rubric. I have a question. If we could go to, I believe, I apologize, I think it's either slide 13 or 14 on the Skype interviews. No, maybe it's before that. I don't know, maybe.
I'll just jump in while you're,
Yes.
just because I think there might have been some confusion on that last piece, because as a part of the process, and I sat in on the Skype interview part of the process, and then the actual activity part of the process. And in that, there is a specific rubric, and these are the people that I would know, and I'm a sitting principal with somebody else, that we're actually grading the applicants on based on that rubric as a part of the process. So it's not that anybody from my school that I'm the principal of, I'm providing that information to the group to look at. It's actually people outside that don't know necessarily who those candidates are, which to me made it actually a much fairer process for both internal candidates and external candidates, because you have some very specific things you're looking for.
Okay. It's just my recommendation. Again, we don't have to provide solutions at the table. So this is actually one of my biggest areas of concern about this process, the Skype interview. And the reason I say this is it is unnatural. It is not an inherent skill. I would ask how many people here have participated in a Skype interview they themselves. It is not a skill that is needed to be able to communicate via Skype as a principal or as an assistant principal. And to me, this is an experimental part, unless you can tell me that this is a best practice that exists in HR. I have, as a board member, participated in Skype interviews of potential employees who are distant, across the country, and it was awkward. We had trouble assessing somebody's, their affect, their, are they struggling because of technology, because of communication, trying to appear natural? And to me, this is the equivalent of a high stakes test. It's a barrier. It's a barrier to getting into the pool, because if you don't do well in the Skype interview, you're out. And in educational vernacular, I think this is the most problematic portion, because I think there are people who are not in the pool because of a Skype interview process, which is a skill that we don't need them to have anyway. So I would ask that as a next step, we receive as board members the rubric to understand the how you're assessing the skills of the people going into the pool, and then I would ask that this portion really seriously be reflected on, because I'm not entirely certain, as even a general HR, I mean, it's sort of a backstop if it really is a distant candidate and you don't want to pay to fly them in or something. It's a nice to have, but I don't see that embedding it into the process aids us. And in fact, I think we potentially lose out on really, really good candidates. And the last thing that I want to touch on, if we could go to slide 13. The diversity, expanding the diversity of the candidate pool. I think I've asked this question before to no avail or no successful avail. Diversity meaning what? What does diversity mean?
So in the context in which we were speaking in this presentation, we were looking at gender and also looking at race.
So I ask that because when I look at hires from the pool and 80% are female, that concerns me. That concerns me as a mother of 4 boys. It concerns me because education is a female-dominated position. Why would you try to hire more females instead of males? I don't understand why we're not hiring the best candidate. So that's number one. And number 2 is I don't see age. And I will tell you that there is a very decided feeling, and this is at, I think, all levels of our organization, but particularly in schools, that there is a bias to young, blonde, and female. And that there is a thought that if you don't fit into that there is an extreme ageism that is happening tacitly in our buildings. And I am concerned that if the focus is we have to hire by female. I can understand potentially, although I still have my problems that we're going to hire based on the color of a skin instead of the quality of the candidate. But we can have, semantic arguments about, where that best fits and who that best fits, particularly minority boys. That's where the real rubber meets the road, difference has been made. I don't understand the left at all. And in fact, I feel like the left, what's there on the left side of that screen potentially opens us up to lawsuits for reverse discrimination against male candidates. Why is what's there on the left side a good thing? And then how are we mitigating ageism against older candidates?
So with regard to the data, it's important to note that these aren't targets, that this is actually the data in year one. And so as we look at the smoothing of multiple years, we may see a difference with these numbers. And when you look at those numbers over the longer period, we did see that smoothing. So this is of course year one. It's also important to note that as we think about our teaching pool, a majority of our teachers are female. And so as you think about the numbers of those individuals who would go into administration, you might see more of those administrative positions being held by females. And so that's another thing to consider.
So the only other thing that's missing from this presentation, and I think the board has brought this up before, there is a decided difference between an offer and a hire. And I think much of the public narrative has been around a narrow statistic around a hire, which belies the real data, which is the offer. And you can offer a job and somebody cannot take it. And if you only measure based on hires, you are fundamentally misrepresenting what we are doing as a system. And if we don't have the hire matched with another slide that shows what we've offered, we are one of the most expensive places in the United States of America. We have the worst traffic in the United States of America. There's wonderful things associated with us, but there may be very valid reasons why somebody does not accept a job. And I think to be fully transparent with the public about what we're doing, and also to complete the rest of the narrative, it is essential that as a next step, that we start producing and regularly reporting on the offers, not just the hires.
Tammy?
Sorry, it's Ryan.
Thank you.
Followed by Ms. Corbett Sanders. I just want to keep you on track.
Okay. I agree with so much of what my colleagues have said today. This has been a great discussion. The first thing I want to, and I would just echo everything that Mr. Moon said. As an at-large member, the new process does not allow the kind of engagement that board members used to have on these selection processes, and it's hard for us to measure what's going on in the district in terms of professional development. So I do wish that could be built into the process somehow. The first question I have is, we have these two tracks. One is for the laterals and one is for the pool, correct? So those in the lateral, or the sitting principal track, they are not in the pool, correct?
Correct.
So how do, and Elizabeth, I appreciated her point about some of our APs and associate principals potentially having more jurisdiction than some of our principals at smaller schools. So let's say someone is elevated from either an elementary school position or a middle school position to a high school associate or assistant principal position. Do they then have to reapply to get into the pool if they're currently sitting in an AP or associate position?
No, once an individual is in the pool, they don't have to reapply if they change levels.
That's not what I'm asking.
Okay.
If prior to the pool's existence, which was a year ago, they had served as a principal, but then they were elevated to a different position as an associate principal at a high school, they would not receive the same lateral benefits that another sitting principal would get.
So what we've done is in terms of, and I understand your question, I'm going to get there. So at current sitting principals, are automatically in the pool, or they don't have to really go through the process, so they automatically step in at phase 2, so they're not having to go back through an application process. If someone steps away from the principalship and left the principalship in good standing, meaning they had successful evaluations, they too are exempt from having to compete to going through the pool process. So a current FCPS employee who may have transferred as an elementary principal into associate principal at a secondary school, they would automatically be considered eligible without having to compete in the pool stage.
I don't think, I appreciate the answer. I don't think that's been communicated, because I've heard a number of employees complain that they are locked out of the pool and they find it demeaning to have to reapply through the pool process. So just something to consider. I think Megan Elizabeth had excellent points about the positions we've had open this past year, which would, in many circumstances, be considered very plum positions. And we've had 1, 2, or 3 people apply that are just not suited. And I think that presents very grave concerns for the school system. I mean, the candidates that we're seeing through this process are substandard. So, I don't know what the answer to that is, and certainly that's not referring to our friend from Frost Middle School. You're excellent, but there have been cases this year that have presented major concerns for at least me as one board member.
Well,
yes.
And Mr. McAveen, I think that this goes back to the point of that professional development that we were talking about, leadership development for our teacher leaders and for our assistant principals. It's part of that whole picture. And we were having a conversation with RAS a few weeks ago about the principal selection process. And there was a question about the availability of principals for a possible selection, wondering if there would be the candidates within the pool. And so I asked the question, well, if we didn't have the pool process, do you think that there would be a number of strong candidates there who would be, eligible, or that you would consider for that role? And the answer was no. And so as I think about the pool process, it perhaps might be seen as a barrier, but I think at the end of the day, it's really about providing that meaningful professional development so that we can ensure that we do have those candidates who will do well within that first round. As I'm thinking about the activities in the first round, as I'm thinking about the processes, and I'm looking at my RAS colleagues who I would want to jump in at any moment, as I think about some of those activities, we're not asking you to be a principal in that first round. We're talking about very basic pieces of the role or of the job that we would hope that you would at least have some knowledge of. And so if you're not there yet, we want to make sure that you can get there. And as a person who used to hire principals, I would want to make sure that we have candidates who can understand, the very basic pieces of the job. So I'm hearing everything. I think we're all hearing everything that everyone is hearing or is saying today. And I think a lot of that is operational. It's about your particular realities that you're seeing within perhaps your districts or within your schools. And we want to make this a better process for everyone. But at the end of the day, it's really about ensuring that we have strong candidates, regardless of any type of process, that we have strong candidates who are ready to sit in that seat on day one and be strong principals for the system. So we hear everything you're saying because we want exactly what you want. Your wants are no different than the wants from everyone around this table. Anthony wanted a job and he got it. And our assistant superintendents, they're looking for those strong candidates. You have parents who are saying that we're not getting the candidates. We're seeing the same people over and over. You're seeing the same people over and over. We want to get there. And Ms. McLaughlin, earlier you talked about running that concurrent system. We talked about that too, but I know that with human nature, you might get a person who will say, you know what, I'm not going to go to the panel because I might get a chance to go in the other way. But we're trying to get people into the pool because we want to we're giving you free professional development. We are giving you free development. And who wouldn't want that? And so we wouldn't want someone to sit out hoping for a pass so that they don't have to go through that process because it might be too hard or it might be too difficult. Not understanding that once they get into the principalship, that's the hardest job that they're going to have, or at least the hardest job they've had in Fairfax County up to that date or to that time. So we want to make this a stronger process. We want to provide the candidates for you so that you have that depth and that you can say with full confidence to your communities that this is the best person for the job. We're asking for a little time to get there, and we're asking for patience on everyone's part, on our candidates, on our principals, on our board members. We want to be responsive, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have those strong candidates who can do well in this process, because it's not really about the process. We want them to do well for the students who are in their schools. And that was kind of a long answer, but I've been sitting here quiet, and I felt like I needed to say that because we're all on the same page here. And we've heard you, we've heard our principals, we made some changes, we've heard some great suggestions today. And we know that not all board members have had a chance to talk yet, so we're going to take more suggestions and add those to the list so that we can make this an even better process.
Thank you, Marty. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate Sean's comments earlier that, you know, we're a year into this process. We don't want to yank the rug out now. But as one board member, I do hope to see progress within the next year or so. Otherwise, we don't want to continue seeing what we're seeing. Yes.
Can I just add
Sure.
one comment?
Uh-huh.
I just want to also stress again, the candidates that we have in the pool have gone through a very rigorous process across and been assessed, and we consider them to be strong candidates. But then we have to cross-reference that and look at what the need, fit, and match is for our individual schools. And so to say that they're not strong or they're substandard, they've met our standards and have really proven themselves. But I think having a deeper pool with a larger number to match our needs across, you know, our system is really what our area of focus is in looking at the fit and match.
Right. Yeah, I think that's well said. My final point, you know, it's come up multiple times today, the idea of talent spotting. And I want all of us to be very careful that we are not prioritizing administrative positions over teaching positions. And I know that's probably not what's meant, but sometimes when we have these discussions, that's how it comes across. I don't want us to be going into classrooms and poaching our best teachers to be administrators, because frankly, many of them I would prefer to have in the schoolhouse than in the gatehouse. And so, you know, just as, you know, in my family, I have, you know, a father who teaches and I have a wife who teaches. They couldn't give a damn about administration. They don't want to be administrators. They prefer to be in the classroom with the students, and that's where their passion lies. So I hope we don't start poaching teachers out of the classroom and moving them into administration.
Ms. Kofax, could I just clarify a point that was made, just because I don't want there to be confusion? I wasn't suggesting you run the old process and people do an end run. I was looking at more of that when we're in between cycles, then if we're looking at a pool that still lacks depth, in between the cycles, rather than lose people, we might want to think about how we augment it by grabbing people in between when we know we're trying to do a search. And, you know, we're looking for that best fit match, as Dr. Ivy very eloquently sort of captured. I think what Mr. McElveen was definitely trying to indicate was at times we had some complex principalships to fill, and we didn't have the pool with the expertise and experience for certain needs within our schools. So it wasn't that the candidates were not satisfactory or strong, but we definitely had situations where we didn't have people with the experience.
Just wasn't a match.
It wasn't a match, and it
wasn't a match.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I have Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Palchik, and then Ms. Evans.
Excellent. And as a time check, we're going to try to finish this by 3:30, correct?
We will try, my darling.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to give us a time check. I'm glad everybody has, a number of my colleagues have raised the issue of the size and depth of the pool. I think that goes to the heart of the challenge that many of us have seen in the past year. And I was just looking at some numbers, you know, the National Association of Secondary Principals says that that every year 20% of all schools will need a new principal. So that if we look at 196 schools and we are replacing 40 principals effectively every year, then what we're doing is our depth of 45 people in a pool it's not deep enough. And at the same time, then what that does is we are moving principals around from building to building, which we understand that's necessary for new experiences and everything else. But in some ways, it's not only that, it's because we prioritize the needs of this school building over that school building, and we may take a top-notch principal and move that person. That's one piece of it, but the other piece of it is not when we do these transfers, we need to be very aware that when we transfer these principals, they bring with them, they pull over a number of top-notch talent from the building in which they are moving from. And so we need to, I believe, have some guidelines on what are the parameters for that transfer process. Because, I walked into a couple of schools this summer where a principal is a new principal transferred from someplace else, and they said, oh yeah, and here's my team of people, and they all came from that school, or a number of them did. And so I just would add that to the dynamic.
That's a very good point.
And when we look at 20%, 196, we're looking at potentially up to 40 principals a year. And just from Region 3 over the 2 years, I've got, and I may not have gotten them all, but I have at least 14 principalships that have been replaced in that period of time. And
22 in 3 years.
22, thank you.
22 in 3 years in Region 3.
Yep. And that doesn't include Region 4, which I also have some schools in, and they've also been replaced mostly by transfers. I'm just giving you a sense of the problem. So we need to expand the number of people in the pool. And I think we can do this by two ways. One is looking at sheer numbers, and then the second is the length of time that they're in a pool. Because if we go to, I forget which page it is, where we talk about comparing to other systems, slide 4, we're on the shorter end of eligibility years, and so it would be helpful, and you don't have to answer it now, but from a best practices and the size of our school system, why are we doing 2 versus 3 or 4 years? Okay, so if we could add that as something that we talk about. So, and also if we're talking about 40 schools a year needing new principals, then there's and we at a minimum have, we want to have 2 or 3 candidates for each one. Then we can run a formula, and that will give us the appropriate number that should be in the pool. And my gut says it's probably double the 45 at least. And it probably is closer to having a pool of, let's see, 60% of 198. That would be a minimum. I mean, and I'm just running it off the top of my head, and I'm using just replacement theory for systems engineering, and so I'm probably totally wrong, huh?
And we can, we'll certainly consider that. And a lot of the conversations we've had up to this point, when you look at that pool eligibility, the internal conversations have been really looking at that 2-year as not necessarily at the end of 2 years, you're gone. But I think that it might be better to think of it as at the end of 2 years, let's have a conversation about the success you've had in the pool. Do you want to continue in the pool? Is there any additional professional development that you feel that you could benefit from? So I think that as we look at that, it's not necessarily at the end of that 2 years. Again, we've been talking about that a lot, but it really might be a check-in with candidates to then say, is there anything that we can do to support you differently in this process so that we
But
can
your
get a
messaging
match
doesn't,
for you?
your messaging doesn't do that when you say you're eligible for 2 years.
You're
People
exactly-
say it's not worth it.
You're exactly right.
And I would also suggest, as far as your talent identification, your talent identification has already begun when you appoint people to AP positions. And I would suggest, similar to how we do how best practices in making sure that there's an even playing field, is that everybody get evaluated at a fixed period of time, say year 5 of being an AP or year 3 of being an AP, that says, okay, we're going to just do an assessment. Are these people that we should be trying to identify to go into this pool and encouraging them, rather than the subjective manner which it is today, which is, and I'm going to pick on Joe because you are an amazing principal, as you know, I think of you. You would have the dream team of APs, and we would ideally want you to say, these APs, this one in particular, or both of them, need to be principals at some point.
I've been trying.
Oh, I
She's
know
not
you
ready.
have. I know. But that's why I'm saying some sort of more formalized process of ensuring that everybody who's gotten through the AP gate gets a chance. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to time. I don't think we're going to make our 3:30, but because we have 4 school board members who have not spoken, plus several go backs. So I'm going to just say Ms. Palchek, followed by Ms. Evans, followed by Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you. And I will be very brief in my remarks. And then we have principals who've taken a day away from their kids, so I would really love to hear from you. But I agree with a lot of what was said, and really along the lines of what Ms. Corbett-Sanders was saying. In my mind, I think this is a great first step into an improved process. A couple of questions. One, I didn't see anywhere here comparisons of our candidates and and eventual hires from this year compared to pre-pool years. So I don't know if that was brought up, but I know my understanding is that we didn't have a huge number of outside applicants before this. So that comparison, I think, would be really helpful so we can start to see trends. I would love to see that. I agree. And then with what Ms. Corbett-Sanders was saying is I'm thinking, yes, the length is important, but also that pre-pool or that almost eligible time frame. So I know, and Dr. Zuluaga has many of my schools, and we have many conversations. He knows all his APs, all his principals. He knows the ones that are, great leaders and learning and have great potential. And so how do we, I think the AP pool is important, but then between that, the sitting APs, as we're saying, and those who are maybe going to be eligible, is there a way to incorporate them so they start to get that practice before they're that fully vetted, 100% ready to be principal? That's where I'd like to, I know we have many, and as we talk about diversity, however we define it, 0 Hispanic applicants and hires. I think we only have 3 sitting Hispanic principals, many more AP. So how do we ensure that they're getting the training that people with different teaching backgrounds or professional backgrounds before they became administrators are sitting in those administrative positions? So I think that's really important. And while some, like Mr. McElveen, have family members who are excellent teachers and happy to be there, I have a sister-in-law who's an immigrant, career switcher, excellent teacher, and now an excellent principal who brings her talents to her whole school. So I think there's, an ability to make all of that work. Teacher training programs, I think the Fairfax Teaching Fellows, which I believe Dr. Brabrand went through, New York Teaching Fellows, I have many friends who went through that and became excellent teachers. So while I know we want to be careful about how we use our funding, I do think that and that's something I would have gone through when I came back had it been still here, the Teaching Fellows program, other ways to look at our PD when we pair it with credit programs, with programs that our professionals need in order to become, either on the MA level for teaching or for administration. When we start to create a lot of different PD, I guess my question is, there's only limited finite time in a person's life. So if they have to do RPD plus their master's work or their other professional work, does that give an additional burden? So that's just something I assume you've talked about and want us to have more information on as we kind of look at funding. And then finally, before I wanted to hear from you, the other one is just questions around interim principals. I know that's sometimes something that APs do before looking into becoming principals. If you have more information on those interim principal positions, and just getting more information overall of the track that our administrators take before getting there. Is it DSS, DSA, SOSAs, how we look at the whole pipeline, which I'm sure you've had conversations on. So any information or further conversations on that, I would love. I will stop there. And then I would love to, I know we don't have a lot of time, but you are here with us, Anthony and others, some of our sitting principals. If you just want to share briefly your experience and recommendations for moving forward.
Thank you so much. What really spoke to me, something that you just mentioned, is the development of our strong teachers and being able to develop them and kind of recognizing their own passions around leadership and developing them from that position into other roles that impact other teachers that could include administration. So even within my building, I think about, I have tremendously strong teachers and 5 are going through their administrative programs right now. I like to think that I'm a good, strong leader, so that's why they're doing it. But I'm really proud of their work, and I think as we think about bringing outstanding teacher candidates into our county, that is the pipeline for the future administrators. So I'm a strong advocate for continuing that work, whether it's at Dogwood or throughout Fairfax.
And do you feel that the pool process works for those kinds of teachers and administrators?
I think when you talked about certain skill sets, there's absolutely the passion around individuals who are going into administration, and I think whether it's this process or any process, I think it's a skill set that we need to support them in, because it is very different than the day-to-day administration pieces. So it's new, and I think we can adjust to it.
Anthony, you're in the hot seat.
Hey, is this thing on? I wanted to say that, no. So I'm very fortunate to be in Fairfax County for 17 years, and I was spotted 17 years ago by Dr. Brand and by Dr. Ivy as well as a teacher at Herndon High School. It's been 17 years. It took me 8 years to get to this position once I was an assistant principal. I'm excited about the new process. I think it really narrows the focus for folks who really are passionate, who want to get into administration. A lot of my colleagues around the county specifically did not want to go into it because it's rigorous, and I thought that was interesting. I thought the rigor of the process was really exciting to me because I wanted to go through and show what I knew. I wanted to make sure that people knew that I was ready to be a principal, so I really appreciated the process. I'm proud to be one of the few middle school candidates that were admitted into the pool. So I was really excited about that. The things that I really saw that were really key benefits to the process were, the process was fair, and I thought, and transparent. Everybody knew, or through the presentations at the very beginning, you knew what was expected of you. So that thought process about what should you have in your resume, what are they looking for, I knew that at the outset. I thought also that my skills and expertise were known by a wide variety of people. So it wasn't that nobody knew me when I was going into the interview process. I felt because of the process, I had a portfolio that I had built up. I also thought strongly that my getting the position wasn't based on just one 30-minute interview, which I really appreciated. And also, again, the folks who actually went for it, I thought wanted it. And I think, to be a leader in Fairfax County Public Schools, you have to have that passion and drive. So those are my thoughts about the strengths of the process.
Thank you. Can I add on to that?
Absolutely.
So Javon and I was responsible for the professional development after the candidates were selected. And one of the things that we talked about is that there was a clarity among the candidates. So we ran professional development twice. And every one of those candidates that came through the professional development that we provided, we really worked on what is it you really want to be able to do? What do you need to know? There was the quality around those candidates. We've worked with the aspiring principals pool as well, and it was a difference in what that candidate looked like and what this candidate looked like. We felt that those candidates were ready to lead, that there were just areas that they needed to work on and develop. And so I think from what I've seen so far, I agree with everyone. You know, we have some growing to do. We think as well that we need more candidates in the pool, and I think we're going to start seeing that. But there are a number of candidates that I thought would be great for this pool who did not apply because they wanted to wait till the nuts and bolts were worked out.
That's right.
And they said that to us. They were like, we're going to wait, we're going to see how it goes, and then we'll apply. I do think the clarity around the 2 years is a point that people kind of said, well, wait, I don't know if I'm ready yet. So I do feel like that those people who have applied for this pool were ready. We did meet outside candidates and provided opportunities for them to participate. And when they did come, were able to come, we had a candidate to come out of Chicago. We tried to make sure that they got FaceTime with folks so that the assistant superintendents, the EPs could see who all of the candidates were, because it was no longer this is the people in Region 2. They're the only ones who can apply for positions in Region 2 because they know Region 2. So now we felt like that everybody got an opportunity to see who those candidates were. What do you want to add?
Just based on the feedback that we received from those candidates moving forward, overwhelmingly, they felt like it met their needs. Amelia and I made a point to make sure that we had our big ideas, and that came from the responses from their initial interviews. So there were patterns of growth for each of the candidates. And so we capitalized on those, but we went a little step further and asked them specifically, what would you like to learn more about culture? What would you like to learn more about as it relates to special education and those kinds of things? So we made it very relevant to their learning. There was a lot of one-on-one and FaceTime, as we shared with a lot of the regional assistant superintendents. They came and presented to the candidates. So for some of the candidates who may, like you all shared, that familiarity piece, those candidates were able to have FaceTime with all of the regional assistant superintendents and many of the executive principals that they may not have otherwise had. So there may have been, I know a lot of candidates who were a part of this pool who in the past weren't, they weren't the kind of people who made a lot of connections outside of their buildings, but they were outstanding APs. So this was their opportunity to show what they knew through the tasks, through the different interview processes. And a lot of them had positions, like Anthony, who had been trying to get positions for many years, but as a result of them going through this rigorous process and being able to show what they knew how to do as an instructional leader, helped them to be able to stand out. So I think that the pool process is great. I think that in Fairfax County, we have to have top-notch leaders, and I agree with everyone around the table that we need more candidates in the pool. There's no question about that. But the level of candidates that we have in the pool right now are outstanding.
If I could just comment on the backing up to the pipeline and building the pipeline, I think our office is doing a lot to support the teachers, whether it's from entering our program through Great Beginnings and the opportunities that our newest teachers have to learn about teacher leadership very earlier in their careers, to being a part as a mentor coach through the Great Beginnings program, and really a reemphasis on teacher leadership as a whole. And we're about to prepare to deploy teacher leadership cohorts this spring and develop those skills of teacher leaders, because we know that pipeline starts there with our teacher leaders. So we have a plan in place to support those teachers leaders in their development, in addition to courses for our administrators in preparation for applying and being ready for the principalship. So when Sean mentioned on that last slide about systematic professional development, development and the rebuild, it goes back to the professional development study and creating a tight PD system where we have a tight set of beliefs, and those PD experiences are tied to those beliefs, and they all contribute to supporting our strategic plan. And so our office is working really hard to line that up and put that in place, and it is taking some time. And through this process, we've had a lot of learning along the way about how to better position ourselves and think about the support that we're providing our aspiring leaders and our newest leaders through the process. So we've been growing through that as well. But we are really excited. Stay tuned on that teacher leadership piece, because we think that that will really contribute to strengthening the assistant principals that are coming down the pipeline as well, that will support our leaders.
And if I could just make one comment in regards, Dahlia, to your comment about interim principals and opportunities for sitting assistant principals, the regions do consider that, and it depends on the length of time that the position is open and the circumstances and needs for that position. In some cases, we will bring in a retired principal, but we would much rather have an aspiring principal or an assistant principal to have that experience as an interim. It really depends, though, too, on where that person is coming from and if there's someone then that can fill in for them. But we want to give as many opportunities as we can to our assistant principals.
Thank you all for your comments. We appreciate it. But I'm not done with first time, Star. All righty. I have Miss Evans, followed by Miss Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you very much for those comments. Those were very helpful. I am going to go back to the point that some have made that about, I will say, first of all, I do think that this has the potential for being a significant improvement over what we've had in the past. I see it happening and developing. So thank you for outlining it for us. I did want to go back to the numbers. I think we've all agreed that we could use more in the pool. Mr. McDonald, you had said, I think when you were on slide 12, that this isn't reaching our goal. Do you have a goal, a number goal on how many you would want in the pool ideally at any given time?
Sure. Ultimately, we want between 2 and 3 times the number of candidates than we would have vacancies. The good news is we're trending much lower in terms of turnover versus the nation. We're replacing between 20 and 25 principals a year here in Fairfax, so we're doing better than the national average from that regard. However, we also have to plan for worst case scenarios. So we do want to build that pool up. So if we turn over, let's say 40 principals, we'd want at least 80 individuals in the pool.
At least 80. So, and if it was 3 times, obviously it would be over 100.
Right.
So we're getting closer. Can I? But obviously we need to go farther. Of those in the pool, is it safe to assume that almost all of them are assistant principals, or no?
Not all of them are. We have someone that is a central office employee who is in the pool. She actually was appointed to a principalship this year.
Right. Actually,
So,
I'm aware
yeah.
of that one. But would most?
A vast majority are.
Vast
Yes.
majority would be assistant principals.
We also have some DSSs and
I see.
DSAs.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because I see that you say that we have 350 assistant principalships positions, so that certainly gives us a pool right there to look to. And I agree with those that said we should be doing more about the external candidates as well. So on 14, I guess one of the grows here, to put in those terms, no Hispanic principals selected from the pool, and that gives me considerable concern. I was just looking at a statistic saying that of our ESOL students, 62% of them are Hispanic. So I think we really need to be looking much harder to find not only Hispanic but Spanish-speaking principals. It makes a huge difference in the kind of schools that so many of my schools, particularly where we have so many Spanish-speaking students in ESOL. Do we have any strategy for that?
So right now, we're focused on a couple of different things. One, the advertising and the outreach, and ultimately our base pool is going to be our teaching population. And when we look statistically across our teaching population, the number of teachers, Latino and Hispanic teachers, is a smaller percentage of our total population. But we need to reach out beyond the scope of the organization, also internally, looking at having those mentoring and coaching conversations, developing teacher leaders into assistant principals. And so that conversation's happening, and we're working to build that particular group and other subgroups up. We do want to see a diverse pool available for selection into our principal vacancies.
Okay. Well, I guess I would put that at the top of my list of things that I think we need to be working on. I will agree with those that feel that the eligibility needs to be clarified, that it's actually longer, so it doesn't discourage people. And the idea of parent input, I think that was an important point Mr. Moon made as well. I will say, Dr. Zuluaga, I'm so glad you're here today. Dr. Zuluaga and I work on the schools in Mason District, and I've been extremely pleased with the principalships in Mason District. So thank you for that. And I will say, as far as involvement, part of it is all of us staying in touch with the regional assistant superintendents. But that's really all the questions that I had. So thank you for your work on this. I'll look forward to seeing where we are in 6 or 12 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Ms. Keys-Kamara?
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be back after I had to take care of something for work. I agree with a lot of things that have been said, so I'll just kind of hit the points. With respect to diversification of the pool, I would love to see at some point what the plan is as to how to, just to follow up on what Ms. Evans just said, how we plan to address that, how we plan to diversify. Obviously, the numbers that we saw in that little pie chart are, trending in the right direction. But I would like to hear as to, in a short amount of time, how we're planning to address that. I want to go, and I didn't get to hear everything Mr. Moon said, but I think I can channel some of it. I haven't really talked to him. We'll see. You let me know. Okay, Mr. Moon. But as the newest at-large member, I've been a bit concerned at times as to how much information I get with respect to when I'm asked to be a part of the process. And so I kind of gave Dr. Zulago a hard time about a week ago, I think, and asked him, I said, can you give me this specific information? And I mean, he rose to the cause. I mean, come on. It was awesome. But then I thought, wouldn't it be great if I got that information every time? Because sometimes I feel like there you kind of get the information that says, here's the person's name, here's their resume, we're ready to hire them. Please don't hold up the process and get back to me by tomorrow. That's pretty much what the email says. But I would like to, you're laughing, it's true. But I would like to kind of understand more what the process entails, who you talked to, who's participated, what kind of feedback you've received. And Dr. Zulago, you have a perfect example already. I don't know why you're taking notes, because you did, yeah, because you did it just a week ago or so and gave me just an excellent review. And that was the first time I really felt like I had something more substantive to respond to, because I never want this to be just kind of a rubber stamp. I'd like to know why. So if we could kind of work on what that information is going to look like, and I'd love to hear from other at-large folks as to what they previously received, because I wasn't here when that happened before. The other concern, obviously, I'm concerned about, I know we have great folks in FCPS, but we're obviously going to have to go outside of FCPS. And so if at some point we can talk about what those efforts will look like, I will just make one suggestion, maybe throw a little bomb and duck under the desk. It could be that there's a PR problem with respect to people applying. I don't know. And so I would say perhaps that's an issue that we need to look at, because if people have perceptions, maybe it has something to do with only being in the pool for a couple of years. Maybe maybe the word is out there that it's very difficult or that the process is rigorous. Whatever that is, I think we have to be honest with ourselves as to how people are perceiving this process and what, is it that we hire blonde hair, blue eyes? I haven't heard that. I just say that hypothetically. Young, I don't know. I'm only throwing that out there. I don't have that information, but there is a perception, and I think that we might want to do some work to find out what it is. Let's see. I think I already listed that I want to have expectations. We'd like to talk about the expectations with respect to information that's given to the at-larges. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. All right, I think everyone here.
Kofax, can I just respond?
Yes.
Very quickly. So I too saw what Dr. Zuluaga prepared, and it was excellent. I will say that when the board members get the email that you described saying the candidate and who it is, the expectation is that it's then followed up with a conversation that shares much of what Dr. Zuluaga had shared with you in writing. And it's one thing that I want to work on, and with our region colleagues, to ensure that that same information is being shared with all school board members, and we can discuss whether that's in writing or in a conversation. But there should be in-depth conversations with each board member about the potential candidate and who applied.
So if I can just respond to that, I mean, my colleagues may have a different approach, but for me, if in receiving that, these are the things, this is the background information, it would help me to be able to move a lot faster if I had that information.
Okay, so we'll certainly look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before I have go-backs, I'm going to speak, and I'll just start with that. What my colleagues were talking about. Last year, I was very concerned that we very intentionally took that part out of the process, Francis, because I praised you. I said, and it is no, what I want to say, I don't want to disparage at all the current RAS, but the information is distributed very differently from one RAS to another. It doesn't make it good or bad, but there was an intentional step where there still is some, when you look at where the school board, first of all, in my original slide, collect input from the community, we're talking page 6, I think, so we're all on the same page. Let me see. I'm a little, 6. School board member was not even in there when we originally looked at this, collect community, and I put school board member in there. That was added during the briefing. There was also a point, and different regional assistant superintendents used to do it different in phase 3, where to implement the school board member into the process. At this point, oftentimes we were down to maybe 2 candidates, and this is what we were thinking, things like that. If you just want to make it the final candidate and this is why, but I want information on the other, I think then that's where you can, so the at-larges are seeing this firsthand, how intentionally taking that out of the process. And Dr. Ivy, if you can intentionally put that back in and do it with fidelity throughout the system, so every regional assistant superintendent knows this is what the magisterial district gets, this is what the at-larges get, and so we are not at the point where Ms. Keys-Gamarra talked about, where we are just feeling like if we don't at this point rubber stamp it, and lots of times that's what our email is, and it's unfortunate and it's not right. So streamlining and defining and making it the same throughout will be great. Miss Corbett Sanders talked about the principal changes, and I'm saying this as a preface to what I kind of want to ask some of you. So we did in Region 3 have 22 principal changes in 3 years. And unfortunately, sometimes the school board member has to get involved more than they want to because the community member inserts themselves into the school board member's life, so they have to be part of this. And so what I saw, being forced into this process is an earlier part that I would like, is a lack of real principal development. And Sean, we talked about this, not when you're already picked, what do we want, what is there, and there's no formal principal mentor program once you're there and you're brand new, you're the newbies, and something. And I'd like to hear from all of you. You're shaking your head, so yay, I feel like I have a good idea. But, because there are things that you are thrown at that your training hasn't given you. What if you are thrown into a renovation? And there was a time under the old superintendent where the executive principals were supposed to be part of this. And I know that's not exactly happening because I know the RASs can't necessarily do this. But do you think something like that is a good idea? And what would be some of the things that you would like? I'd like to hear from some of you. I know some of you are newer, but as far as the two ladies that were shaking your heads, do you think this would be a good idea? And I don't have an idea right now as to how this would happen, Dr. Brabrand, but I have seen, because of so many principal changes in my region over the years, that maybe some of the changes wouldn't have happened or didn't need to happen if there could have been a more formal new principal mentorship. So if you want to speak, whoever wants to.
Hi. So actually, I feel like I have a lot of support during this process. So I currently have our principal induction program. We meet monthly with Mr. Chong in the back. Region 5 has a first and second year principals meeting. We meet periodically as well. Mrs. Stone is my mentor. Mrs. Amelia Stone is my mentor. And also I was provided with a coach through the principal induction program as well. So I just met with my coach last week, I believe, and we talked through some things. So I believe there's a lot of supports for a first year principal.
Okay.
I was going to say, as for teachers, we have instructional coaches and different teacher leaders built into the schools and programming to support any new or continuing teachers. And so having a principal coach would be phenomenal. And I just think back to my first year and thinking, like, I just need someone to process information with, procedures with, just troubleshooting things or just celebrations, right? And we have our colleagues to lean on, and we call each other all the time, and we have our pyramid colleagues as well. But just the formalized process of coaching, which is so powerful, I think it would be phenomenal.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
The only thing I would add to that is I think that the camaraderie that is developed through the professional development of the principal pool provides those colleagues that you can call on as well. So we have that formalized component. I 100% agree with Mia. I think it's great that Anthony has a coach, but I don't know that that's something that we have across the division, and I think that's a great idea. But I think that it's important for those members in the pool to build those relationships so that they can rely on one another. Because while I did have a mentor my first year, I knew different people to call on depending on what I needed. And I developed those relationships as a result of being a part of ACC and my principal induction program.
Okay, thank you. Becky, you want?
The intention, part of the role certainly of an executive principal is to serve as that coach. I understand it. They are still also an evaluator, which is a different relationship. But, having just come out of that role, a lot of my time was spent knee to knee with principals, coaching them through those very things.
Okay, all right. Well, it seems like some people feel very supported. So I mean, at least for a next step at this point, I would like to say, look at a more formalized process for principal mentorship. You can bring that back to us. And also another next step is a more formalized process for ensuring school board membership of the magisterial district and the region and the at-larges. School board input, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you, Karen. And I had one more item. Well, just an agreement in my colleagues, I don't want to repeat it. I know we're moving in the right direction, but I do feel like in my region, because of the great amount of hires not enough people in the pool to meet the current demand, I feel like I was moving chess pieces a little bit this year, and so that was a little difficult in my region, and so that's where I feel. So thank you all for your time and your input, and I have 2 go-backs before we can let you go. I have Ms. McLaughlin and Ms. Schultz.
Just quickly, I do want to add something that I meant to mention earlier, that especially as we're talking about external candidates and this pool process, it appeared that it sounds like we're talking about them also coming for a site visit at some point in order for them to actually be part of the process. And again, I think we have to be really mindful of where people are coming from. It's one thing to pay out of pocket to fly in, pay for a hotel, all other ways to get here, and all you're doing is just getting into a pool. There's no job attached that you're applying for. It could be a year, 2 years, or maybe never. So again, people might be self-selecting themselves out. So I hope in the refinement period, we kind of look at that again for other school divisions that are adopting this approach and saying, how can we be more applicant friendly for people who are outside of the driving distance where they're not going to have to invest? Because I think we lose an opportunity to get some great principals because of that, especially Mr. Zuluaga coming from Kentucky, which is beautiful country. I love Kentucky. I could see retiring there. The second thing is that, when I thought about how everyone's been so intentional about how do we grow our own, and I was thinking about our assistant principals, and I mentioned this in talking to 2 of our teacher association presidents. We're such an amazing school system, a premier system, that people may make assumptions. Oh my gosh, it's Fairfax County. Well, can you imagine how hard it is to get a principalship? Well, if they saw these statistics and saw, there were 15 openings and only 45 people were in it, so you had a 1 in 3 chance of, being considered to be a principal. I think we would have had maybe a lot more assistant principals throw their hat in the ring, and we would have teachers who would actually start to see this as a actual career path. So I started thinking about the way we dialogue, and I want to echo my appreciation for every single one of the principals who joined us here today, because you're our #1 leader on the front lines. You being able to help communicate to our amazing teachers in the building and our assistant principals that are part of your leadership team, and really anybody on your leadership team, because sometimes you don't have to be an assistant principal, but just really, you're going to be probably one of the most important voices in this process. And I don't know if Dr. Braybrand heard that, so I'm going to just reemphasize that. These principals are going to be one of the most key voices as we get this message out of this new process and this new system, and really making sure that people see this as a viable pathway. And I think we'll see that growth in interest. But anytime you make change, we know you have to communicate it a lot before it reaches everybody. And to our regional superintendents, I think also this will be a key role that they're going to play, communicating out to our principals beyond the ones who are gracing us here today, to just with intentionality on this new thing. And I'll have a next step that I'll bring up when we get there.
Yes, please.
So one of the things, to your point, Ms. McLaughlin, that we're going to do is the HR team is going to be going to all the association meetings to meet with all the principals, because that's something we realize we need to really make sure that every principal has a deep understanding of not just this process, but of what we're seeing in terms of themes and needs. Because while we have wonderful professional development programs established, both division-wide and at the region level, it's that person that's side by side with those assistant principals every day, offering coaching, making their thinking visible of their leadership decision. Those are the experiences that are going to most prepare people for this role. And so that's a piece in our next steps already.
Sure, and beyond just the association meetings, which is great, but if someone's not there at that meeting and they missed the message, so I think it's going to be that constant dialogue when you're out visiting schools, in emails, letting them know well in advance, hey, want to make sure we're heading into another cycle, make sure you're reminding your people that they're in the pool.
And just last week, we were doing that with pyramids. And then also to Mr. McDonald's point earlier, knowing who applied this time, we then as a region team went through our lists of administrators looking at, okay, this person's in their 4th year. We need to set up a career counseling conversation. And so I think the communication between regions and HR and then our ability to work with schools will also bring more people into the pool.
Ms. Schultz.
Yes, thank you. I want to touch on something I think that Ms. Evans brought up, but from a different aspect, the assessing why people aren't applying. I do appreciate you saying that, let all the other people work out the kinks first. That's actually, that's the reason why few people are early adopters. So that's a very good reason, but that's into the pool in the first place. The second question is why they may not be applying for a specific school. And I think, sort of in military terms, the sit rep of a particular school has to be taken into account. And this is my concern of the pool not potentially being big enough, is that sometimes you may have to go find the round peg for the round hole. You just may need a particular set of gifts on my question about the rubric. So I hope we have that in the next steps. That's one. Two is, I forgot to say earlier, I'm very concerned about the length of time that positions are posted. I don't know if any of the principals who have been through this have a comment on it, but it is the second biggest thing, in addition to the Skype interview portion, that they go up, they're up for 5 days or 7 days or whatever, and then they're closed. And if we really are going to be intentional about broadening the pool, and particularly not having an inherent bias just by the process to outside candidates, we cannot have these like flash openings, where it's like open, closed, and then we move on. So that's the second part. The third part is on the why. And I think a couple of my school board members touched on this, particularly the at-large. I think that when we get at the point that we get involved, which is explaining to us, okay, here's the resume, and by the way, I don't want to see any more references at the bottom of a resume of an internal candidate of their own bosses. I don't know who else has found that to be a little bit appalling, but to see a sitting principal or either a sitting principal or an assistant principal's resume that has their region assistant superintendent's name as the references on it as the internal candidate for another job, that's off-putting to me. But the why that person for that school, because our schools are so different. Just, within my district, one high school to another, they may need something different. And so not just the explanation about why we've picked this candidate, but why this candidate is a fit to this particular school, what those skill sets are that they represent. And the last thing, Dr. Brabrand, you've brought this up before, and I didn't hear it referenced in any, and maybe it's buried in the rubric, but in terms of, and I don't know if you're doing it in the professional development piece, the single biggest thing that I think an incoming principal at a high school or a secondary school does not inherently possess are the financial skills. And that is such a massive, first of all, from a board perspective, that's a potential huge liability issue because there's a lot of money on the table. We have, I think it's $1 million at least in unappropriated money, $100 million in unappropriated money is flowing through, and it's predominantly high school and middle school. So that there's a liability side, and how is it that you don't just, by being a principal, I was a principal in middle school and now I'm in a high school, and it's a whole different, not to use a pun, but ball game. And so there's a lot of money and a lot of moving parts that are involved with that financial side. So whether that's built in as PD or we're being intentional in giving that financial aspect, that becomes part of the fit discussion for me that I want to see.
very briefly on that. It's built in on both sides, from the beginning stages in principal pool development, where Amelia and Jovan work with them, and then in Anthony's circumstance through the principal induction program, having the principal and actually come in with their finance tech and or AA and work with them side by side on multiple occasions. And then we've even brought it back per principal recommendation at the principal induction for the second year as well. So it's woven throughout.
If there's any comments on anything else I said.
Ms. Schultz, just to add to that too, in the case of our experienced principals who are changing levels, I've actually started a conversation with a colleague today in Region 2 about working across regions to develop. We each have somebody who has switched levels, or several of us. So how are we taking who we know is an amazing principal, proven principal, and make sure they have what they need to now be a principal at a new level? Because you're right, the challenges of being a principal of a comprehensive high school is very different than a middle school or elementary school. So I think that's some collaboration we're about to engage in across the regions too.
All right, thank you all. Oh, Sean?
I just wanted to address the advertising component of your statement earlier. We did, that's something that we were really mindful of when we were implementing this process. So in terms of advertising the pool, it's open for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, Carolyn? Between 6 and 8 weeks to advertise.
I don't mean the pool. I
Okay.
mean an actual position.
Sure, and then once we have a vacancy for a school-specific vacancy to advertise, that is open for a period of 5 business days. However, before that goes out, we send a coming soon notice to sitting principals and to folks that are in the pool. So they know in advance of the advertisement that this is coming out. And it's at least a week, if not 2 weeks ahead of the advertisement. So they can begin researching the school and seeing if they feel like they're a good fit or match and apply.
I'm going to say, I'm sorry, I vehemently disagree that 5 business days for the 10th largest school system in the United States and what we're posing as a premier school system, a premier destination. I fundamentally, there's no job out there in the private sector that is even commensurate that you would say we're going to open it for 5 days and close it. And I've come across it as a problem, and I suggest respectfully that you expand that time frame.
And those are certainly things that we can look at.
All right, great. All right, thank you all. Don't leave yet, though, because we have next steps, which you can help us go through if you have any comments. Yeah.
Yep. Tammy, can I make one comment? I don't think
Absolutely,
I
Dr.
said
Brabrand.
anything, which I was pretty proud. This is the kind of conversation we can have on every single topic before this board with the administration. You asked us a year ago to come back. We've shown our glows and grows, and I want to keep building the culture of bringing the people to you, be straight shooters about what we did well, what still needs to be worked on. And so thank you. I want to thank all the folks for doing it, and I want to thank the board for the quality of their comments. I just also want to say, just for the board, folks that are newer and even 4 or 5 years, way back, we had a principal selection pool process problem. Even 15 and 20 and 25 years ago, lots of applicants in the west, medium in the central, and fewer in the east. It's true. This is us trying to get better at getting more strategic, more intentional, and building up a pool that can work across any of our county schools and finding the right fit and match. Something that Fabio said I wanted, and Lisa did, we need great principals who are doing actual development to create future principals, not just putting someone in a job, you're special ed for the next 10 years in high school, where you're only going to get this experience out in elementary. Then we need RAS, and you talked about standardizing. Fabio knows every single AP, and he can tell you how many freckles they have on their right hand. I'm not kidding you. We need that consistently at the principal level, the RAS level, and all the way up for the deputy to review when it comes to me. The tighter we do that, the better the quality we're going to be able to do in the principal selection. And finally, I just want to say to board members, we've had at different times contextually, we cut a lot of things in the budget over the years. You had hard choices to make. that eliminated the kind of systematic professional development that you're telling us we need to re-engage in, and we will re-engage in it. But during times of budget cuts, we cut some things. The program for me to become a teacher no longer exists. The program to help me become an aspiring principal no longer exists. The LEAD program that Dan Domenech brought 20 years ago no longer exists with Wallace. We've got to go back to the things that we were using and take it deeper, and we will. So thank you for your work, and we look forward to doing the next steps with you.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. And if we could see the next steps, they're up there already. Do you have who did this? Oh, we didn't do that this time. Yeah, well, just so people are aware of, this was my next step, and to ensure that this, because typically that's the way we do it. All right. Well, I think we need to read through them. Let's read them out loud because this is a recorded session. Number 1, include in future Brabrand briefings more information about the 2 years for pool eligibility in FCPS.
That was mine. It was more information about why we have that why. It's more information as about why, the rationale for why only 2 years.
All right.
And I know that we then heard more through Becky Baining and others, but I think just capturing, as they said, if it's not hard, fast 2 years, then how are we making sure we communicate out to applicants that they're not getting kicked out?
Number 2, include in future Brabrand briefings how principals are selected to be part of the panel.
The pool, the interviewing.
Part of the interview pool.
Pool selection process, yeah.
Interview pool selection process. All right. Number 3, include in future Brabrand briefings, referencing slide number 13, percentages for every stage.
So that was mine as well, and I want to make sure it's actually kind of clear. So what we really need to see is, again, the demographics of our current teacher pool, not just who's in a pool, but just our current teacher population, our assistant principal population. You go from what is the population demographics in our pool, male, female, by race. Then you're looking at, okay, here's our demographics of the people who work for us. Then we look at the demographics of who's applying into the principal pool. And then you're looking at who ends up being selected. That puts into context, as Mr. Moon was pointing out, you might only have one Asian candidate selected to be principal, but it may be that in terms of the demographic percentages, if we only have 7% in our demographics within the county for teachers and assistant principals who are Asian, then we might be seeing that we're staying with the demographics of what we have, or at least we're adhering to that. Same with African Americans. I think the number was around 18-20%. Well, at least it's giving us a barometer of how close are we adhering to what does our pool look like? Because we know we don't have the diversity that matches the national populations.
Can we add with demographics the raw numbers and percentages? Because the Hispanic hire issue that came up earlier, there was one Hispanic in the pool.
I was
So,
just going to ask
one.
if you're including Hispanic.
Yes, absolutely. It
in
needs
that
to
as
be
well.
raw numbers and percentages.
Raw numbers and percentages in
All right.
order for us to understand
Got it.
context.
And let's be clear, so Ms. McLaughlin, you're talking about everything outlined on slide 14, correct?
It was slide 13.
Slide 13.
Well, 13, 14, you're correct, Ms. Evans. 13 and 14 lend
That's
it
the
to
one that
itself.
says male,
Yeah, we can say
female,
13, 14, right.
Asian, Black, declining
And I
to
don't,
Hispanic,
and
two or
sorry,
more
Madam
races.
Clerk, it would be current teacher population. Yeah. AP population. And then principal applicant pool. Those are the 3 demographics. I don't think you have to say for every stage, then you can just say by gender and race.
So you're looking for applicants to the pool and those in the pool as well?
Correct, I want to
Right,
see.
the whole thing?
Yes.
All right. Number 3, clarify why FCPS would need to reestablish its own leadership development programs like aspiring principal cohort when there are external professional options like administrative credential programs or graduate. Whose was that?
That's mine again.
Yeah.
And so my point being, even Dr. Brabrand closed on it. Yes, we eliminated those programs during the Great Recession, and Dr. Brabrand's talking about resurrecting it. And my point would be, I would like to understand first, why is there a need for us to do stuff internal that requires money and funding if it turns out that there are these external pathways for people to be developed into and therefore apply and be candidates? So I just think we're going to need a little more information first before we'd start funding programs. Just because we used to do it doesn't mean we need to go back to doing it that way, especially because one thing, Dr. Brabrand, that I know you know hasn't changed. We don't have the resources we used to have a long time ago. It's never going to come back. So we may not have extra money to do the things we used to do like that.
All right, number 5, provide the board with a copy of school-based administrator rubric. That was you, Ms. Schultz.
Can we put in BB, Elizabeth?
I don't care where, just that.
The next one, Elizabeth. Find diversity. Okay. Provide data and continue to regularly report statistics for the number of offers, not only data for hires. Number 8, compare the number of candidates and eventual hires to previous years. Elaborate on plans.
Sorry, Ms. Koufax. Ms. Schultz, if that was yours, what, like, how far back? Previous years? Do you want him to give you the last 5 years, the last 10 years?
I think that was mine.
Sorry, Ms. Palchak.
It's okay, thank you. I think whatever context, 5 years, it's just this is the first year, so if you feel 5 years is adequate, I trust your judgment on how to help us have, a baseline and comparison. Thank you. And that included outside candidates as well. Yeah.
All right, where was that to add 5 years? Number 8, compare number of candidates and eventual hires compared to last 5 years.
And she's talking about internal and external.
Well, all the data, so the demographics, internal, external, everything we've covered here. Thank you.
Number 9, elaborate on plans to address diversity concerns.
I think this may be mine, and I guess I would just want to pinpoint, especially attempts to recruit more Hispanic candidates.
Recruit and do professional development and develop, right, I assume?
Whatever, that's a good idea, to recruit.
Develop and develop.
Okay.
All right. Number 10, consider adding more formalized process for principal mentorship. A more formalized process for new principal mentorship.
Ms. Derenak Koufax, I actually wouldn't use new because we have principal mentorship. I'd like to see principal mentorship when you have a principal going from elementary school to secondary school or from a transitional school to a.
So just
Yeah.
general.
Yeah,
You just want to
so-
keep it without the new?
Please do.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Number 11, consider adding more formalized process for school board member input into the selection process.
Earlier input.
I don't know if I want to consider this. I think everybody said they want it back in.
I'm wondering if that's supposed to be the one I was talking about when I
That
was,
was mine because there were two together. That,
well, okay,
Well, it
then
could
I don't
be,
know
but
what
go ahead.
happened to mine.
oh, then yours, what would you like? Can we combine these two? What's your
Yeah, it's
thought?
possible. I was asking about how we get information. Remember, I was describing the
Right.
letter and outlining specific information. I guess having a process of getting information to both.
Have a formalized process for obtaining information on principal
No, no, no.
No.
How to providing information to the school board members.
Right.
So that we have, we're getting the same, or.
Everyone's getting the same
Are you
information.
suggesting a systemic approach to
Yes.
informing school board members of, in the identification of candidates for individual schools as well as the principal pool process?
How does 11 not say that? I mean, you could add in the selection and potential candidate process.
Right, I think 13 and 11, Karen. 'cause
But I
think
was
we-
trying to, I was trying to have a discussion with respect to what information would be provided. I'm just.
Systemic approach.
Formalize, right.
When they decided who they want to hire, that there's more
Consistency of information.
Yes. I don't see it up there, so I assume that was the one standardized information, that's.
Just to be clear, some of that information from what I understood you were saying with Dr. Zulaga is more information on who was considered and some of what was taken into account.
What
in
was the
final
process?
decision,
Describing the process and what it included. That's correct, Ms. Palchak. Thank you. I'm not sure that says that, so that's part of the reason I want to identify it.
And one thing we'll do with regard to information earlier in the process, I know last year at a work session, you identified as a board when you wanted to be interjected into the process. And so we will go back to that work session, look at the document, ensure that we are adhering to the guidelines that you set forth. And I don't remember the work session when it was, but I do remember the discussion. We were trying to figure out at what point the school board would be involved in the process. So we will look at that and then go back to RAS to see where that is happening. And going back to what that original school board recommendation was.
And can I also say, just mentioning that what Regional Superintendent Raz Zualago submitted perhaps might be a guide in terms of the information that I was referring to.
And so we're looking at where you are in the process to get information earlier on the characteristics of the candidate. And then once we found that candidate, following up with board members with the same information, whether you're magisterial or an at-large, that you have information on the candidate, and you can either get that via a phone call, depending on if that's what you like, but we could still provide you with the write-up for those school board members who need to have it in a different format.
And I was going to suggest, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, the word formalized is kind of stopping me because, a lot of this is conversation, and so I would say standardized.
Well, for me, he actually submitted something to me in writing.
Right.
And perhaps what I'm trying to do is spur on the conversation because it's inconsistent, right? It's inconsistent with respect to what information you get on whom and how it was evaluated for that particular school.
You want to make sure that you have the same information shared with school board members. And if a magisterial is getting this information, you want the information, and your preference is to get it in writing ahead of time so that that can help with the conversation.
It's true, but it's not based upon what the magisterial, I don't know what the magisterial person is getting, but I would like to know how the decision was made, what information was relied upon, who participated in the process, what information was revealed in that process, et cetera. And I think that Dr. Zualago's
His template, we can go back to his information and use that as a template to start working on that.
a starting place. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure, and I appreciate that, and I think that's helpful. I do have concerns around confidentiality and how many more hands of us included now have access to this information. So just
It's
keeping
always
that in
been the
mind.
magisterial district and the at-larges.
No. I'm not seeing this information writing either. I usually have the conversation. I assume so that I don't now have this mass information. So I just want to make sure that HR feels comfortable in the way it's shared with us systematically, whether it's verbally or in writing, that people will be protected.
Yeah, right.
through the
I mean,
That's all.
You want standardization, and whether it's in written form or it's the communication dialogue that's gonna take me through in that discussion and dialogue, this. Look, the reality is, and this came up last year, it's still true, and Dr. Ivy is going to fix it. Standardization of the conversation that you're having across regions as you do principal selection. The same structure, the same standardization, the same level of information, so that different board members aren't getting different pieces. I only got a sentence, somebody else gets, 20 pages. I got it. We'll address it.
Ryan has a comment on this.
No, my comment is brief. We had this discussion 5 years ago. It came out of a retreat. At that point, Francis Ivy's communications were actually held up as a model of what should be done. It was sent back to the deputy superintendent. The process lasted for about 6 months, and then it reverted back. So we just need to look at what we did in the past, and I think Francis was part of that. It's not that difficult.
Exactly. Those were my comments. Exactly. Thank you. 2, elaborate at 12, elaborate on how candidates are matched with facilities, why they are a good fit for a particular school, and consider adding more time to the postings.
Yeah, is that
The
the
last
last one?
We missed the, consider revisiting the Skype interview portion of the process as a potential barrier and a not best practice, and use it only when necessary for outside candidates.
I have, and I don't know if it's going to be brought up or it can be included with the principal, the conversation around the mentorship support for assistant principals. I know we had that conversation and how principals, informally are supporting their assistant principals. So if we kind of know the outcome of where we want APs to end up, can we start to formalize as they become APs, how their principals can support them, kind of the rubric as well, and I don't know if we are going to make that part of being a principal, how you support your APs and help develop them, but yeah.
All right.
I had a couple.
Oh,
At
yeah, a
least
couple
one.
more. Okay.
Well, they weren't up there. I'm sorry, I looked for them. But one of them had to do with the perceptions and looking at the possibility, consider how we're communicating and what perceptions are being created, because I do think that may be impacting how people apply or their willingness to jump into the pool. So just look at the communication aspect of it.
Okay.
I'll stop there.
All right. And you have one more. Megan.
Yes, I would just like to have Dr. Braybrand and HR review with the LT about, right now, as I understood it, that the regional superintendents can bring forward someone for an expedited review if they're coming in from out of the system in between the cycle. And my concern is how people will know about that, because thinking about new people moving in, we're already as a system trying to help our public who live here understand what the regional offices are and how they serve. So I just think it's going to be important that it may not be just the region offices who bring an expedited review. I would like it that any principals, anyone in a leadership within the division becomes aware of someone who's moving to the area. Whether you want it funneled through the region office, but I think we need to communicate system-wide. If you've got people who are relocating here, refer them over to the region offices, but this goes to the principals again. Principals are going to hear about people coming in, or teachers are going to hear about people relocating in, and I just want people to know where to bring those candidates to the region office with intentionality.
And we can add something to the website too that lets people understand what that process looks like. And then if they're interested, then they can do X, and then we can get them into an expedited review.
Right, so Madam Clerk, I guess that would be number 16. Just saying, have Dr. Braybrand and HR work on a plan to ensure greater communication around external candidates relocating to the area about our principal hiring options, including expedited review.
All right. Corbett Sanders.
The one thing that isn't on there is to have an update from Dr. Brabrand at a future date on how we are deepening the principal pool, a status update to give us the appropriate number we're going to have in that pool. So going from 45 to, is it 120? And then along those lines is the very first bullet point of next steps, which was the length of time people would stay in the pool.
All right. I think that is everything, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate you, and this work session is adjourned. We will have a 5-minute break in between sessions, and I do believe we are now, the chair just informed me that, we're a little behind tonight, so the conversation, agenda item number 5 on school boundaries is going to be postponed to a later date. We will end tonight's work session with graduation requirements, and we will reconvene in 5 minutes.
We're doing it on October 15th. Huh? Well, it's the first time we've pushed it, and yeah, we don't want to rush it through. We can't rush it through.
Yeah, I always forget my smell therapy until I.
Yeah. Right. I want to make it a real and meaningful. Yeah. We want a real and meaningful conversation about probably the most important issue that we're going to deal with. That's what I mean. Yeah.